All righty. Well, thank you everyone for coming tonight. We took a little bit of break in April. We're all volunteers and we just needed some downtime. So a bit energized to be back at it. And kind of like I was talked into, volunteered, voluntold to present last fall. Guess who got the volunteer, voluntold? Our good old Lee. And in classic uh, pop-up fashion, we kind of just figure this out as we go. So Lee's going to do his introduction about himself, kind of fit in with all of his slides, but Lee's just an awesome dude. He's always someone that I can, mention something to and kind of calms the waters for me or makes me think of, something in a different way. Uh, he's a Navy vet. He's been, working in the consulting side for however many years, and he's just a whiz bang of all kinds of knowledge. And I'm happy that he's one of my many friends in this IO sphere. So I'm just going to hand it over to Lee to get us going on what he's going to talk about tonight.
All right. Thank you, Pam. All right. So if that seemed a little disjointed, we figured out today that Pam said, okay, I'll do an introduction, and then we both just kind of forgot about it. And so she went today, hey, did you have a bio? And we both went, oh, because we're used to getting it from someone else, because usually it's not one of us doing this. So we're going to just kind of wing this. All right. So normally I am basically an ad hoc speaker. I very, very rarely um, do full on like we do now. So we're gonna see how this works. So all right, so we're gonna see what I wrote. We'll see how it goes. If something that I say sparks something, feel free to drop it in the chat. I probably won't see it, but Pam will, and she'll jump in. And you can of course, um, we will have some Q&A at the end. Uh, and yeah, so here we go. All right, so we're going to see how this works. I did actually write something out, and I do very seldom use a script. So, and even more rarely do I stick to one. So we'll see how this goes. So I'm going to start out by thanking Pam and Arlene for believing that I had something to share in this forum, and for convincing me to do this. I jokingly say I was bullied into doing this because they did take a little convincing. Um, those of you who know me know that I seldom lack for something to say in whatever convincing. And I can typically add something to the conversation. And at least hopefully that I add something positive, or worthwhile to the conversation, at least is my hope. So no, I'm not going to talk a lot about my childhood. I mean, I did have a fairly supportive parents who did their best to understand me, and I had a somewhat stable childhood in small town America. The story relevant to tonight's conversation really didn't start until my university years. Um, and I thought long and hard on what I could bring to this particular conversation. And I've honestly been very hesitant to join this particular conversation. We have had some amazing speakers who have shared their expertise on some very impactful topics. And honestly, who am I to step onto the stage with them? If there is something that I know a bit about, it's imposter syndrome. And it ties into my story, and I think it ties into the story of our field in many ways. And I also think that it may just tie into many of your stories as well. And so I'm going to do as Pam and Arlene bade me, and I'm going to share my story. Um, and I'm going to do my best to squeeze 30 years into roughly 30 minutes. So we'll see how I do with that. You will notice that I have very few slides because I'm really not a slide person, but so you're not going to see a whole lot of fancy pictures and all the little pictures of my childhood and everything that some of you others have done, because I also realize that there aren't very many pictures of my life, at least not that I have currently in my possession. So we're just going to do a basic timeline. I'm just going to go through the basic story. Um, so I have had the privilege and the pleasure to meet many amazing people in our field, from students and early career professionals, many younger than my own children. And then I've had mid and later career academics and professionals, those my contemporaries, all the way up to professors and professionals who blazed the trail before us. And it has been an amazing and enlightening and inspiring ride. But for many years, I was a voice crying out in the wilderness. So let me go back to the beginning. I mean, according to Marvel, everyone must have an origin story, right? So let me warn you that, like any passable origin story, there may be some jumping around in time, but I will do my best to tie it all together. So I started off in mechanical engineering at Louisiana Tech University in the fall of 1990, and I hated it. So I'm going to throw out a sorry to my friend Danielle Suprick because she's an engineer. Sorry, Danielle. Some of it was very interesting. After all, I had always been very technical minded and I enjoyed solving problems, but I just couldn't see myself doing it for the rest of my life. The truth is, I had only chosen that major because that's what my father is, and it seemed like a logical decision. It was really the path to least resistance. However, when my attention wandered, which of course had nothing to do with my ADD or my social life or dating or anything like that. I swear it had nothing to do with any of that. My grades kind of started to slip, and I decided it was probably time to explore other options. So I went to what at that time was called the Student Services Office at the university, where I took all the usual aptitude and interest batteries, and I did some career counseling. And when you know it, my results looked like an almost perfect U. I scored high in the hard sciences on one end, like engineering, and high in the humanities and social sciences, like psychology, on the other end. Well, I'd already had the intro to psychology, course, and I found it interesting. So I figured, why not? Let's give it a go. Let's go far to the other end as far as engineering as we could go. So now, when I started psychology, I knew what most people know. Psychology, man, it's all about mental health, counseling, psychotherapy, all that kind of stuff. So I figured that's what I would do. That's what most people do in that field, right? The plan was to eventually get a doctorate in clinical or experimental psychology and hopefully go into academia and maybe do some research. Even then, I knew I really didn't want to go the traditional counseling route, but I figured that was the gateway to where I wanted to be. Well, I finished my bachelor's in the spring of 1994, and I went straight into my master's program in counseling. It made sense. There's a progression, right? It's the normal way you do things in college, bachelor, master's, and on. You get the degrees in order. Well, I'll tell you what, you guys that have gone to school more recently, you've got it good. All the information that you carry around in your pocket. Yeah, we had the internet back then, in spite of all the jokes that some of my friends like to say about me using stone tablets and whatnot. We did have the internet, but it was not developed to the point that it is now. And a lot of information was not as readily available. Rather than looking everything up online, you had to either make a phone call or you sent in a written request for information and then you received a catalog in the mail in a few weeks. Yep, that's right, snail mail. This obviously limited the amount of information you feasibly had available to you. And what I found out later was that on the mental health side of psychology, many of the doctoral programs wanted you straight out of your bachelor's program so that they could steep you in their methodologies and their schools of thought. And consequently, what that meant was that as I was nearing the end of my master's program, was spending a lot of money on application fees, was that most of the programs I applied to were not accepting master's level applicants, especially those without several publication credits to their names. They were really looking for those heavy, research students that had been doing a lot of publics. And I wasn't. Obviously, that was bad news. The good news is that Tech was working on a PhD program in counseling psychology if I could just wait it out. Of course, I wasn't looking to go that route. Yeah, and this was a fact that was painfully driven home to me by a suicidal teenage girl during my practicum. Now, thankfully, we both made it through that experience and I got her the help that she needed. But I knew without a doubt at that point that I was in the wrong field. It turns out that I am an empath, and internalizing other people's trauma is not very healthy nor sustainable as a career option. I have had enough of my own trauma without carrying around other people's as well. Now, in spite of this, I tried. I really did. I got a job at the local children's home. And of course, I got stuck with all the preteens with the worst behavioral issues and emotional challenges. And so I continued to apply for various mental health related positions. But on top of being very unsure about this career path, I was also still unlicensed. And wouldn't you know it, recent changes in the law had put a lot of licensed professionals out of the school system. So now I was competing with them as well. My timing sucks. Actually, there is an urban legend in my family about our familial luck and timing for things like this. But that's a story for another time. This course of action was just not meant to be. So now what? So at this point, I decided a new course of action was required. Well, it turns out my university had another psychology master's program. Wow, some luck, right? You know, we joke about IO being the best kept secret in psychology. Well, it is such a well kept secret that I was a grad assistant and I actually had to ask another grad assistant what IO was. How sad is that? You know what he told me? He said it was the human side of HR. Wow. We know it's more than that, but that was what he said. In fact, at my university, half the students in my program had business degrees and were looking to go into HR. And that was the option that my university offered. Now, of course, we know that IO is so much more than that, but 30 years ago, if you weren't going into academia or maybe into the government, if you got a degree in IO, you were probably headed into HR. You know, I like to joke that when I graduated, IO was pronounced HR. But in many ways, it's really not a joke. So now, ironically, I did not go into HR, at least not after my internship. I did do an internship in HR, which ironically is the only HR position I have ever held. But as I said, my timing sucks. And when I graduated, there were no entry level HR positions anywhere. Oh man, if you had 3 to 5 years experience, I mean, they were everywhere. They were looking for you, actively recruiting. Entry level, not so much. So man, I worked in retail, finance, quality control, inventory management, data analysis, and ultimately ended up working communications in the United States Navy. None of which you would traditionally consider an IO role. But through this entire time, the burning questions remained. What was an IO role? What did I go to school for? Did I waste my time and money? What was I even looking for? Some of you may have had some of these same questions. Some of you may still have these same questions. I have had many of the same struggles as so many of you. Why didn't employers see the value in my degree? Why didn't they understand that I could solve all of their problems? They just give me the chance. My first job out of school was working in a call center for an investment company, where really all they cared about was that I had a degree. They didn't care what it was in. I look back now and realize it was less that they didn't care, is that they just didn't understand. And I didn't have the words to explain, which is now one of the things that I try to help students and early career professionals, how to really to articulate what your value proposition is. All right, so now remember earlier when I said I was a voice crying out in the wilderness? Let me tell you what I meant by that. As a student, I wasn't able to attend a PSYOP annual conference. It excites me now when I go and I see so many students. I mean, it just wasn't in the cards for me. I couldn't afford it. wasn't part of my program. So really, other than the journal, I did not get much for my membership. Consequently, I did not maintain my membership after graduation. I really couldn't afford it, and I didn't see the point. Just no value for me. I also did not keep in touch with my classmates. Now, this will sound strange to many of you, but there was no social media at the time, not even MySpace. And every time you moved, you changed service providers, which also means you changed your phone number for your landline, and you changed your email address. And you had to pay for long distance at that time. So you didn't just pick up the phone and call people. And if you actually had a cell phone, with the number also tended to change because you changed providers when you moved, they were so darn expensive you couldn't afford to call anybody, and texting just wasn't a thing then. Honestly, at this point, I'm not even sure I could tell you any of my classmates' names without looking it up. I mean, it's just a long time ago, and just so I knew no one in the IO field, not a soul. I mean, I'm sure at some point I met someone who had a degree in IO, but it just never came up in conversation. I mean, how does that even come up, really? You know, honestly, I actually did. Irony of ironies, I found out fairly recently that my uncle has the same degree from the same university, and I had no idea until he mentioned it after seeing a post of mine on LinkedIn. Who knew? It was every bit of 25 years after I graduated that I met my first IO in the wild. And it happened when I was retiring from the Navy. I was scrolling through LinkedIn, wondering what I was going to do with my life next, when I came across a post by Dr. Destiny Pree talking about being both an IO psychologist and a veteran. And I decided that I really needed to have a conversation with her. So I sent her a message. And I'm sure some of you who know me know how huge that is, as I typically don't just randomly reach out to people I don't know. I mean, I am a grade A super introvert. This is not something that I do. Well, she agreed to a chat, which is definitely not off character for Destiny, if you know her. So soon she was introducing me to others, and I realized that there were actually people out there doing IOE things, as she calls it, which I love that term. She was the first to invite me to sit in on the Work Cookie podcast. The funny thing is, I don't think she even realizes that she kind of set me up. She kind of tricked me. She suggested that I join this panel discussion, but she never mentioned that it was recorded for a podcast. So I intended just to pop in and listen because, I mean, I had done this a long time. What have I got to bring to this conversation? But okay, I'll sit in. It's on Zoom, cool. But I got pulled into the discussion like quickly, and I really enjoyed it. Now, once I realized that it was for a podcast, I remember thinking, man, I really hope I didn't say anything stupid. But, after participating in a few episodes of the podcast and meeting more people associated with CBOC, the Society for Evidence-Based Organizational Consulting, which of course is why we say CBOC, I decided to bite the bullet and join their Pathfinder program, which is a program designed for people new to the field. Because even though I had had my degree for many years, in many ways, I was a newbie. I was really hoping it would help me find my way in the post-Navy world. So when you join CBOC, you do an introductory call with one of the experienced members. And I just happened to meet with Dr. Jeremy Lukebaugh, who was the founder of CBOC. And while we were talking, I was grousing a bit. I mean, you guys may have heard, a bitching sailor is a happy sailor. That's me. So I was complaining about all that time spent. All this time spent using my degree. I spent all this money. And well, apparently, at the same time, he was looking at my LinkedIn profile. And when I finished, he immediately started pointing out all the IOE stuff I had been doing throughout my career. Well, that moment was the beginning of the epiphany. Now, while it's true that there aren't many real, IO jobs per se in the regular civilian non-academic marketplace. The truth is that they are pretty much all IO jobs. Now, this began a voyage of discovery for me. And this idea was reaffirmed over and over again through countless conversations with professionals at all stages of their careers in fields that span the spectrum, from retail to engineering, from nursing to recruiting, from administrative to learning and development, and on and on. They all have characteristics related to IO, and they all have aspects that can be improved through the application of IO principles, theories, and research methods. If you ask many individuals with degrees in IO if they're working in their field, they will likely tell you no, but I beg to differ. An IO practitioner or psychologist has knowledge and skills that allow them to do a great variety of positions in a way and with a quality that another would struggle to achieve. They are, in fact, working in their field. It's just a niche. I am an industrial organizational psychology practitioner, though that is not my job title, and it never has been, it likely never will be. I use IO psychology every day in my work, and it enables me to do it in ways my peers cannot. Now, not always necessarily better, but from a different perspective. All right, so now let's shuffle back just a step to lay out how we got here in this room. So it started out with destiny. That's Dr. Pre, but maybe cosmic kind as well. She included me in some virtual networking sessions and introduced me to others in our field. She asked me to facilitate some of those sessions when she was unavailable, and eventually suggested that maybe I take it over. Now, hers were targeted specifically towards military, veterans, and mil spouses in the IO space, but I saw a greater need. See, when I graduated, they handed me a piece of paper and they wished me luck as they showed me the door. And I was beginning to see that for others, that was in many ways still the case. So many other fields had a space, but not us. And that just would not stand. So the pop-up was born. Now, if you've wondered, it was called the pop-up because originally my schedule when transitioning out of the Navy was a bit chaotic. So the events would pop up when I had a space. I would drop a post on LinkedIn and a few people would show up and we'd chat. By the time it became a regular thing, the name had stuck. It ebbs and flows. Sometimes there's a handful of people and sometimes there's maybe 50. But the important thing is that there's a community and all are welcome. Eventually, that led us to wanting to provide a space to get more voices heard. And here we are. We wanted to bring in speakers to speak directly to you on topics that interest you from an applied lens. We wanted to give students an opportunity to share their voice as well. So we aim for once a quarter to give them the stage. And in the future, we'll be looking for other opportunities to add to our community, like other types of webinars or maybe affinity group networking. So please share your ideas and be watching for what's next. So what does the future hold for IO? Honestly, I think it's a pretty exciting time to be in our field. I know it may not look like it from where you're sitting, but I ask you to take a step back and look at it through my lens. When I entered the field, there really wasn't one, and there was no community. But recently, I've noticed job postings searching for candidates with a background in IO, and others listing IO as a desired degree. And that fact that all of you join me here this evening shows that we're not alone, and that gives me hope. And this is fairly recent. And I really hope that you'll see that and that you guys will help me to build this community and spread the word. And that's what I've got for you this evening. I want to thank you all for joining me tonight. And I want to thank Pam and Arlene again for their gentle bullying. And here we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. I think one of the parallels is that I kind of, look from myself and how some of us get into the IO sphere space is we try and find that home that, like engineers, am I going to work manufacturing? Am I going to, do architecture? Is it mechanical? Is it electrical? But IO, it can take us time to find that space. And how do we find that home? Where do we find the route, the guidance? And I can pretty much tell you I'm still figuring that out, myself. And I would say it's not a be all end all to only work in one particular industry. Uh, and so I think that's another way to how do we translate IO into how the rest of the world runs. Um, so that's kind of my key into what does everybody have for uh, questions, specific to Lee's path, or just in general to what do we see for IO, like Lee, like Kim's question. What do we see as the future of IO Psych? Where is it going? Is there an evolution that we're starting to see, or are we still running a little stagnant? So maybe that's a good question for you to start us off, Lee, and kind of, seeing how we can create a interactive conversation here with everyone.
That's a great question. I see the future of IO as kind of a choose your own adventure, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Because IO being such a, so niche driven. And I think that that is one of the superpowers, but also one of the big challenges is, well, what do you do with it?
Mm-hmm.
And, my response is, what do you want to do with it?
Yeah.
And, often that's the biggest challenge is not, is narrowing it down. And, so many people get so focused when they first come out of school, when they first get into into the work world, and they try to find the perfect job. And it is so uh, it is so challenging because I mean the reality is a perfect job, especially in the entry space, you know, for many doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
The important thing is to get into the work, get into the work world, to start getting the experience, to start applying those skills, to get a paycheck, you know, and to start building. Because if you talk to some of the most successful people in the IO space out there, it's the ones who just got out there and didn't take no for an answer and just started finding the opportunities to apply their skills without getting wrapped up in the I need a title. I mean,
It's
I
the
get
experience, Lee, that I think that really helps to support and solidify and guide that IO practitioner to really find what they're really good at. And some of us, we kind of, we're more generalists, but then there's some that are very, very much, the specialist. And I think with how much IO is not yet part of the common degrees, there's a bit of, how do we find ourselves, type of a journey, once we get out of school, so to speak, and kind of what do we want to do? What is our interest? What are our strengths? How do we find that type of job? But to your point, Lee, there's no title. So we kind of have to, hop around a little bit and kind of do experiments of what works and what doesn't work.
You do. And I think two important things that you have to do is one, don't get wrapped up in the title.
Yeah.
Is the first thing that you have to do. You have to let that go. I have seen people who were just so focused on the title that they spend a lot of time unemployed
Mhm.
because they won't take a job because they're looking for that title. And one, that's not good because there's no money coming in. And two, it's putting a huge gap in their resume and whatnot. So, you know, and we're not there yet. And we may never be, but we might. I don't know. I'm not a prognosticator yet. I'm working on it. That's the one thing I have to, that's the first thing. And the second thing is, we've got to become bilingual,
Mhm.
because we speak, psychology, we speak IO, we understand all of the concepts and the research and all that kind of stuff. The people on this side of the door do not. We can't expect them to learn our language. We have to learn theirs. And so we have to be able to step out there. There's three paths. There are three. I'll call them pillars, three legs of the stool, and one of them. And my good friend, Dr. Kim Derryberry, here in the room. I don't know if she coined it, but she used it, so I'm going to use her term for one. We have academics, very important. Obviously, they're teaching us. We have the practitioners, and then the other one, and that I got from Kim is the pracademics, which are your people in the middle, the ones who are still doing research and whatnot. Maybe they're also doing some adjuncting or whatever, but they're also got a foot in the practical working world. Maybe they're consultants, maybe they got a full-time gig somewhere or whatever, but they're doing both. And what we need is the two other legs talking to that third leg. And we really need to embrace that. And we need to, because we've got an us and them oftentimes between the three. And we need to bridge that. And because so many times you got so many people out there, and I was one of them for a long time, because obviously I graduated a long time ago, and I was fully immersed in the practitioner side of things. I've only in the last few years really started to reconnect and relearn a lot of the more academic side of our field, so that I can use some of the research and whatever else. Many of my peers still don't do that because there was no disconnect. So do they consider themselves IO practitioners or whatever? They don't. They just have a degree in it that's in the rear view way back when. And for us to bridge that, we've got to get that third leg involved. And and I understand, especially for those with that PhD, that PsyD, that they worked it, they want that title. I get it. Well, we need to separate the title from the job title, and understand that just because your job title is like my job title, I am a program manager. That's my job title. That's what it says on the job thing at my employer, which has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that I identify as a IO psychology practitioner. Does not have to, that your job title at a given organization does not in any way have to affect your self-identity as what you have earned. And so many people, I think, get wrapped up in, because you think about, you can do the same job in 5 different organizations and have 5 different job titles and do the exact same job. We need to claim that identity claim that, practitioner or psychologist. You earn that, claim it, and separate that and understand that job title, here's what job title is. I mean, again, go to 5 different organizations, do the same job with 5 different titles.
I think there's another question, which is kind of an interesting flip way to look at that self-identity lead that you were just mentioning. So, question is essentially, have niche areas changed since you first started in the field to present day? But is there a way to flip that to say, okay, what is my personal professional niche and how does that fit into at this point in time? So can we create a niche for ourselves and we kind of slot ourselves in, or do we still have to be that round peg that's got to be, molded into the square hole?
I mean, we're adaptable. I mean, you think about the way the world has changed. And I see Kim's question in the chat about the niche areas changing. Of course it has. You think about how the world, things that have changed and how things think of change management. Let's take change management as an example. Change is a constant. Change has happened ever since humans have been around. But as a discipline, change management has only really matured in the last, what, 10, 15 years? And as a title, as a change manager, maybe what, last 10? Where you could actually get a job where the job title was change manager. So you had people that were managing change in some regard, but their job was something else. It was a sideline thing. And then somebody somewhere went, this change is kind of disruptive. Maybe we should manage that. And somebody figured out it was kind of important. And somebody wrote a book and somebody did some research. And all of a sudden we got people who have a title as a change manager. And so has the niche areas changed? Of course they have. They evolve. We have entirely new ones form. We have them that combine and do different things. Human resources used to be called personnel. We have all these different things that evolve over time. Even in IO, things that I studied in school, you guys, you guys who have studied since then, which is probably all of you, you were studying things that I didn't study in school. It wasn't a thing yet. I mean, it's so cool. Like I hear some of these students, they're talking about, oh, we're doing this thing. And I'm like, wow, that's like wizardry. What is this voodoo you're talking of? Because it wasn't a thing when I was in school. And we continue to progress. We continue to add to the body of knowledge. We continue to evolve as a science. Hell, we're a STEM field now, for God's sake. If you had asked me a few years ago if we'd ever be declared a STEM field, yeah, esports and sports psychology. There you go.
I learned that one from Kim. That was really, that's a thing. So it
Hey,
just
esports
shows
is a
you
big thing.
in the psychology field that it's evolving, and it all depends upon also what's going on in technology, what's going on in, the evolution of engineering. Hey, AI's got to come into this conversation of how does IO adapt to AI? Can we be replaced? No.
Well, think about, AI. We're talking about, oh God, AI is going to take over the world and Skynet, blah, blah, but it's going to replace us all. No, it's not. You know what they said, and I forget who said it, AI is going to replace your job. No, AI is not going to replace your job. Somebody who knows how to use it will.
Yes.
And well, Dr. Baresi with her hearth thing, human-centered leadership in a technology space. That I think is one thing we as a discipline have to keep an eye on, because as we become more and more focused on technology, I mean, case in point, what do you do when you call a help desk or something? Press 1 for this, press 2 for this. How many of us immediately start pressing 0 or start going, operator, many of us don't want to deal with a damn electronic voice. We want a person. That's where we need to keep focus on that as more and more organizations. I forget who it was. I saw an organization, one of their big things was, hey, deal with us, you'll get a person. That was a selling point. That's kind of a thing. Everybody's like, oh yeah, more automation, more of this stuff. And they're like, hey, not us. Hook up with us. You'll talk to a person. And people are lining up. They're like, I don't want to press 1. I want to talk to Pam, And that's one thing, I don't know if you saw my post on LinkedIn that I did over the weekend, but that's one thing that Ian and I were talking about the other day is what separates us. I mean, there are a lot of related things that do a lot of the things that we do. There are a lot of other niche areas that we operate in. Our difference, our value proposition in a lot of ways is the fact that we have that humanistic lens. Are there people that do change management? Yeah, of course they are. But do they do it from a humanistic standpoint? Do they really take into account the human factor, the human cost of change? When all these things that we do at work, okay, organizational effectiveness. What are we doing to make, what is our point? What is the result? Are we taking into consideration the effect on what makes an organization? People. So when we talk org effectiveness, what are we talking about? Are we looking at it from a business perspective? Are we looking at it from a people perspective? Are we just trying to squeeze more, get blood from the turnip kind of thing? Are we trying to make it better for our people? Because when we lose the human perspective in the short term, will we get more profit? Maybe. If we cut our staff, use more AI, whatever. There's a lot of companies that cut staff and increase the use of AI who are now, trying their best to quietly hire more people back because they went too far, because they didn't take that into account.
A question comes to mind, Lee, to kind of hear your perspective and kind of see what others have for their input on this. How do we message this all-important humanistic side to the C-suite? Because there's a lot of decision-making going on at that level that my own personal opinion, my own experience, there's a big, huge disconnect of what actually happens out on the floor, so to speak, versus what they think happens out on the floor. So how can we, push this up the chain of command, up the ladder, to where C-suite really starts understanding more and more and more that you can't help the customers or have a customer until you have employees and you take care of your employees. Customers don't come first. Your employees need to come first.
That's true. That's very true. And people need to understand that. And see, that's where, I mean, org culture has a lot to do with that. But a big thing, another place that we shine, another IO thing, is communication. And that's one where you really have to focus on the communication, and you need to work on the communication flow through. Because, I mean, yes, if you're in a big organization with a CEO in the ivory tower who has no idea what Bobby on the floor is going through, if you can't ever get the CEO out of the ivory tower down on the floor, you might not. And it is a challenge, because when you have a board and a C-suite who's looking at the bottom line and they're not looking at the human costs, well, they may not. So sometimes that's where you get down into people analytics, some of that kind of stuff, where you really have to look at, okay, so we may have to, the ROI, that's where you start having to get into the analytics, where you have to look at, all right, so our ROI is, and you have to stretch that string a little bit further, and you go, okay, so we may not be able to hit it in Q1, but if we make but we're going to consider this an investment, and we're going to look at long term. And so instead of in Q1, yes, but we're going to make the bump to where it's going to be more of a long term deal. Because you look at these organizations, and this is one thing that I don't think we study enough. And I really would like to see more IO programs that incorporate some more business classes. And I think that's one thing where our IO programs are lacking. Honestly, what I would like to see, if people have an idea of a niche that they want, what I would really like to see is I would like to see people get a bachelor's in something else, honestly. I would like to see somebody get a bachelor's in the direction they want to go and get their master's in IO. Because so that way they have the grounding in their niche, and then they have the IO skills to take it that step further. I mean, you talk to those people who've gone back and gotten that thing and talk about that experience where they have that basis of knowledge, and it does make a difference.
What you're also talking about, and link back to what you mentioned, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes ago, is that translation. And it comes down to that data story and that storytelling through the data. And that's where the data analytics and really a lot of the STEM part of IO comes in, of how do we tell the story of the people on the floor, and how do we turn that humanistic into some numbers and a story that the C-suite will then understand in terms of, hitting the EBITDA, the bottom line, their, points for how much the stock market's going up, down, yada, yada, yada. That's the disconnect also that's going on. Are we storytelling enough? Comes down to that communication. And do we know how to communicate at different levels of the organization? And is there a way to start a particular phrase, to, get people's attention and get attention outside of your tiny little sphere of, oh, this is my manager, and that's who I connect to. So I think that's a big part of what you're trying to explain with doing an undergrad in engineering, kind of like using Danielle Suprick as another example. And then she goes in and gets IO degree. And the way she's been able to marry those to topics, fields, has just been, phenomenal. It's great. And that's kind of the translation that we kind of need.
Yeah, and I really think that, see, this is one thing that I think that our field could really, really shine. I really think that this is where the community building really, really could become very powerful. This is where communities of practice could become huge. Where, I mean, obviously you got to be careful with, the obvious things, competitive things, non-competes, that sort of thing, non-disclosures, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But with a community practice, for more general information, you can take people who don't work at the same organization, who can share ideas that, non-proprietary, obviously, can share ideas to where they have resources outside of their organization, and so they can bring in ideas. And that's one thing that I've seen people do in the pop-ups, where they come in and they say, I've got a thing. I've got this issue I'm struggling with. I've got this situation. I'm at an impasse. I need, because, a visualization I like to use is when you're in a hole, all you can see is the hole. You need somebody standing outside the hole to go, dude, you're in a hole. And so sometimes when you can say you need somebody standing outside the hole to kind of go, oh, hey, I've got another perspective. And so if you have some form of community of practice, so somebody, you know, you know, with obvious guidelines, within, professional guidelines and whatnot, where you could step outside and you can say, look, I have this issue that I could use professional opinion on, and everyone benefits because, you use it as a case study. You know, when you say, I have this situation, this is what I'm looking at, and I need ideas. And then people can discuss and say, well, how about this? And when you can do that, you know, obviously staying within the lines so that nobody is, unduly benefiting, and it's equitable. So we're going to, this is yours. Okay, great. We'll discuss yours. Okay. And we'll discuss yours. And if you are, um, and the way these things work, if you do them equitably, where, okay, I'm going to bring mine, and the next time we're going to discuss yours, and I'm going to participate fully because you helped me with mine. And we do those sort of things where we can bring these things in, and you can bring to bear the power of community and say, all right, I'm loaded for bear. I've got more info. I've got, well, I mean, just think about like when you're talking about like with Ian, and you say, hey, there's a thing, and all of a sudden, bam, there's a resource. All of a sudden, I've got more than I had before. We are greater than some of our parts. And that is the potential of this community that I would really like to see us step out more and more and more. And this is not a me thing. This is an us thing. I mean, this is way beyond me. This was going to require more people beyond me stepping out and making these connections, and those connections making more connections. This is beyond CPOC. This is beyond PSYOP. This is beyond, BIOP and MYOP and all the other IOPs, and people making those connections and not being a competitive thing, but being a cooperative thing.
Yes.
And we can do it. We just have to do it. To borrow the tagline from Nike, just do it. But we can, because we have the knowledge and we have the experience.
So,
I'm normally I'm a pragmatist bordering on cynic, so this is not just idealism. So, take that.
so what I like about this, Lee, is it's having a free for all conversation, and these webinars aren't necessarily meant to be just strict, here's a bunch of slides, here's a bunch of information we're going to throw at you. We also try to encourage that interaction, the questions, the conversations like this, the exploration of what do we do to find that, happy job for ourselves, or what do we do to expand, explore, experiment with our field itself to get it out there, because that's part of what I see your community of practice idea is that marketing of who and what we are. For me, this whole idea of putting in the webinars, the pie in the sky hope, the doggy hope, is that one of these days, and CEO is going to watch a webinar and go, huh? Well, I didn't know that. Well, I'm going to go look for this, that, and whatever that's IO specific. I need those people in my business. Why didn't I know this? That's my doggy hope. But that's also what I see with these webinars is allowing people to see how we think, the analytical side, the critical thinking, well, I don't know, it kind of depends, or what have you been noodling through and how you walk through this, that, and whatever. And I don't think we hear enough, see enough of just, having these, off script type conversations. There's podcasts out there that are somewhat scripted, but that's what I also like about these webinars is, if this turns into something that's more interactive and just kind of based on what people have as a question that pops up in the moment, in some ways that can be even more important than, what the speaker really wanted to focus on, unless it supports that particular question. Because I think there's so many questions and unknowns that students and practitioners are still noodling through. So I I really like how you just kind of went with the flow, Lee, of how questions came up or my questions came up, and I think that's what we really try and uh, encourage in this space is just having the open and honest conversation about the field and what can we do.
I think that what we need is more connection, more open dialogue. We need more people to understand that they're not alone, that there are
Mhm.
more people who have been where they are and who are open to a conversation. Whether it's one on one, whether it's in a small group, and that you never know where it's going to come from either. You never know where it's going to lead, because one cool thing that I've seen is, and one thing that it's happened to me, I've had somebody come up, hey, I'm looking for this, and I'm like, well, I don't do that, but Pam does, you know, and and I've seen other people do it as well. Is that you know I don't do this thing, but I know somebody who does, and we bounce them amongst ourselves, and instead of making it this competitive thing, that we you know because it comes back. And maybe not directly, maybe not that person, but then somebody says, oh, well, they did that, and it pings around. And so, that person you refer to, I mean, I sent somebody to a person just for a conversation because we had a conversation and they were like, hey, I'm interested in this thing. And I'm like, I got the perfect person you need to talk to. And I sent them to them. They had a conversation. Turns out that person has a course to do a certification in a particular thing, and it led to one doing the other. And um, then randomly, the second person sent me a finder fee. You referred them to me. Here's a referral fee, and I'm like, cool, thanks. Wasn't why I did it. Didn't know it was going to happen, but it was like I was like, wow, cool.
So time check, Lee.
Yep,
We're
we
pretty
are
much at the hour.
right there, right, yep, right there. And I want to be respectful of
Yep.
everybody's time, so we can. Uh, oh, well, there you go. Kim said, just from the pop up, we have. Yep, yeah, for checking. Pam and I being two of those. All right. Well, thank you again, everyone, for joining us this evening. Please feel free to connect with everyone in the room that you would like to connect with. If anything that I've said or Pam or anybody has connected with you and you'd like to further a conversation, or just something just pings your brain later that's a burning question you have to have an answer to, feel free to shoot a note, and we'll be happy to chat further. But beyond that, I thank you so much for your time. Um, and be looking for our next webinar. Same bad time, same bad channel next month. I'm not sure who our speaker is yet, but we will be back next month.
And don't forget, there's a survey that'll pop up once you leave the webinar. Great place to put in your ideas for what we could do to expand. And then the recording, I'll put it up once I receive it from Lee, probably by the end of the week, the weekend. I'll post it up on LinkedIn, and then it'll be up on our YouTube page. So thank you, everyone. Have a good night or have a
Bye.
good day.